The Chris Watts case is back in the news with new updates of letters and pointing the blame at his mistress. It is a brutal and heartbreaking true crime story that has still left so many people confused, angry, and still searching for answers. So many true crime YouTubers have delved into this case, as well as other platforms, and even now for many, it feels like justice hasn't been fully served. It feels that the known mistress should have been held accountable as well. And now from the sounds of it, Chris does too. I did a video which ended up being very controversial on Chris Watts years ago that garnered 2.8 million views as of the time of this recording. And I still stick by what I said, and we'll talk more about that in today's video as well. I'm Linda with It's a Crime, so now let's get into it. Recently revealed family annihilator Chris Watts wrote a letter and put the blame on his devious mistress, Nicole Kessinger, for the mess he's in. And Nicole is also well known in the true crime community and regularly called by her initials NK. And in newly released handwritten notes obtained by the New York Post, which I'll read in a minute, Chris refers to his previous mistress as a harlot and a Jezebel, implying that she is to blame as well for the horrific murders of his wife Shanann, 34 years old, and their two adorable daughters, Bella, age 4, and Celeste, also known as Cece, age 3. Shanann was also 15 weeks pregnant at the time with a little boy they had already named Nico.
We did it again. I like that shirt. So pink means...
That's just the test.
I know. It just says the pink is going to be girls.
I don't know. Just the test.
That's awesome.
But at the time of the murders, Chris had been in a secret relationship with Nicole, aka NK, for a few months, and carefully taking steps to conceal the relationship from his wife, who grew more suspicious as time went on. And in fact, Chris installed a handy-dandy calculator app on his phone that actually wasn't your normal everyday calculator. He'd enter a password to access it, where he'd keep spicy photos in there of his tawdry mistress. And while Shanann was traveling on work trips, Chris would be planning and rendezvousing with Nicole. Shanann was desperate for answers as she noticed Chris's behavior changing, and he was less affectionate and seemed uninterested in her pregnancy. While he confided in friends about her worries and even bought self-help and counseling books, one of which was later found in the trash, Chris was texting his mistress late at night. And instead of trying to fix his marriage, he was busy searching for vacation spots and shopping for jewelry.
Cover it up.
Now, to recap what happened, on the day of the murder in early hours of August 13, 2018, a doorbell camera recorded Shanann being dropped off at her Frederick, Colorado home by her friend Nicole Atkinson after a business trip. Although we can never be sure of the events of what exactly happened that night, as Chris has changed his story so many times, it is believed that shortly after arriving home, Chris strangled his pregnant wife to death. And disturbingly, Chris then wrapped Shanann's body in a sheet and moved her to the floor of his truck beneath the back seat. And heartbreakingly, he then put Bella and Celeste, who were still alive, on the back seats of his truck. They were sitting just above their mother's body as she lay lifeless on the floor. And during the drive, Chris would later recount that the girls asked him multiple times if their mommy was okay. In the initial investigation, though, it was believed by detectives that the little girls were already deceased at the home before putting them in the truck. However, that was changed in the investigation and with the help of a YouTuber who analyzed the footage and saw little footsteps. Once Chris had his family in the truck, he then drove to the Anadarko petroleum oil field where he worked, and as the two little girls sat in the truck, Chris dug a shallow grave where he placed his wife Shanann's lifeless and pregnant body. He then went back to the truck and smothered his youngest, little Celeste, Cece, to death. Bella witnessed everything, and it prompted her to ask her dad, is the same thing gonna happen to me as Cece, and her last words were, "Daddy, no," and he then smothered Bella. The 4-year-old fought really hard for her life and sustained injuries because of it. She was found to have a tear on her frenulum, which is the soft tissue between the upper gum line and lip, and marks on her tongue from biting it. And after killing his daughters, Chris dumped their bodies in separate crude oil tanks. And he even commented later on the sound it made when his little girls were dropped into them. And why the F he would put his little girls in these tanks, besides murdering, of course, is the question. But he pushed them through these tiny little openings, and that would take a lot longer than a minute. You know what I mean? Now, investigators later used GPS to track the whereabouts of his truck that morning of the murders, which led them to the bodies on the job site and the horror that followed the discovery. Autopsy results show Shanann's cause of death was asphyxiation due to manual strangulation. And it's estimated it can take anywhere from 2 to 4 minutes to strangle someone to death. It is not fast. And her unborn baby Nico, at 15 weeks gestation, was expelled after her death, and the autopsy reports say that they couldn't determine the age or gender of the baby. And both 4-year-old Bella and 3-year-old Cece's cause of death were both of asphyxiation due to smothering, and abrasions on Bella's body were present from being forced into the 8-inch opening of the oil tank, and there were blonde tufts of hair stuck on one of the hatches. Now, right after their horrific murders, Chris then went to work as if it was a normal day, and his daughters weren't far away from him while he worked, sinking in the tanks of oil and water. And Chris then made a few phone calls, one to his girls' school saying that he wanted to unenroll his daughters. Call number 2 was to the realtor about selling their house, and the third call was to his mistress to chat about their delusional future together. Wonder what else was on that phone call. And even the night before the murders, there was a text sent to Chris's coworker volunteering to go to that specific job site that next morning. And Shanann had a doctor's appointment scheduled for later that morning. When she missed that appointment, her friend Nicole, who dropped her off just hours before in the middle of the night after their trip, Nicole knew something was wrong. She tried reaching out to Shanann by text and calls but received no answer. And her concerns grew for Shanann, as this was very out of character for her. And at around noon, she drove over to Shanann and Chris's home to check on her. And after no response to knocks on the door, she contacted Chris, who was at work at the time, to inform him of the situation. She then called the non-emergency number and requested a welfare check on Shanann. Chris gave the authorities permission to search his home, and thank goodness for Nicole's intuition. Chris, Nicole, and a police officer entered the home, and inside the family dog was found alone and unharmed. And Nicole's fear grew when they found Shanann's purse left behind with her medication inside. Nicole knew that Shanann would not have left the home without it. They also found her phone in between the couch cushions. And Nicole knew again that Shanann would not have left the house without her phone. And it didn't end there, as her car with the girls' car seats was still in the garage, and her wedding ring was found on the bedside table. Notably, on body camera footage, Chris did not appear to be anywhere near as concerned for his family as Nicole was. And in that same police body cam footage, it was Chris who presented the ring to authorities, and the narrative, you gotta check that out. Thankfully, it didn't take long before Chris was held accountable for his crimes. Authorities called him in for an interview where he took a polygraph test, and unsurprisingly, he failed and subsequently confessed to his father before confessing to authorities. Although his story changed multiple times. Initially, he blamed Shanann and said that she murdered the girls, causing him to kill her out of anger and rage because of it. He said he noticed through their baby monitor that Bella was sprawled out on her bed and was blue, and he said that he saw Shanann strangling Celeste, and that's when, according to Chris, he attacked Shanann. This, of course, was just an attempt to pass the blame onto the wife he murdered to save his sorry ass. And CCTV from a neighbor's property showed Chris in the early hours backing up his truck to the garage and loading things into the back of it before driving off. And the body cam footage showed Chris looking anxious as he and the neighbor and the police officer watched the footage. And once Chris left the property that morning, the neighbor noted to the officer that his behavior was unusual and suspicious.
I've never seen him. If he loads his stuff, he normally just walks back and forth because I get him on camera.
What does he usually load up?
All he usually has is a lunchbox and a book bag, looks like a computer, and usually a water jug. That's it. But the fact that he was in here and explaining to it over and over and over,
Well, odd.
he doesn't look worried. He looks like he's trying to cover his tracks. You know what I'm saying?
Right.
And if he's loading his stuff, why isn't he walking back and forth? But I can't see what he's doing in the back of the truck because he pulled into the garage. Yeah. And he knows my camera's there.
And note, I did a video on it when I first started this channel, which I mentioned earlier, and it had all kinds of comments and controversy to it, and we'll talk about that again in a minute, but let's talk about these details first. By August 21st, just 8 days after the murders, Chris Watts was charged with 3 counts of first-degree murder, the unlawful termination of a pregnancy, and 3 counts of tampering with a deceased human body. Bail was initially denied before being set at $5 million. Prior to his sentencing back in 2018, the prosecutors agreed not to ask for the death penalty in exchange for a guilty plea from Chris after seeking approval from Shanann's family. And her family did not want the death penalty for Chris. They felt that he did not have the right to take the lives of Shanann and the girls, and felt that they did not have the same right to take his. And speaking of Shanann's family, her mom, Sandy, knew something was wrong with her daughter. Call it a mother's intuition. Sandy said she knew something terrible had happened to her daughter even before she knew that she was missing. She said she woke up from her sleep, sat up in bed, and said, "I heard the Holy Spirit say, 'Shanann, I felt my daughter's spirit the moment she died.'" And she went on to say, "I knew, I swear to God I knew. I woke up, the whole house, I said, something's wrong with Shanann." Now, Chris Watts is currently serving a sentence under maximum security at Dodge Correctional Institution in Wisconsin, and 3 people who have had contact with Chris all say that he's sedentary, he's gained significant amounts of weight, and lost most of his hair. And it said he also avoids eye contact with the others for his safety. And according to one guy named Eddie Neves, who spent a year at the prison, said a lot of guys would like to get their hands on him. He killed 2 little girls who didn't do anything to deserve it. He's the lowest of low at Dodge. A lot of people want to get their revenge for those girls. Now adapting to life as an inmate, Chris has apparently forged a friendship with a fellow inmate named Dylan Tallman, and he refers to Dylan as his spiritual twin, and they talk about spiritual matters every day. Dylan said, "We started talking, we had a lot of very long conversations, spiritual conversations, and they studied the Bible together, reportedly discussed writing their own book together. But after some time, Chris decided against the idea, and Dylan then went on to release a series of 3 books called The Cell Next Door, and the book describes the friendship between Chris and Dylan and go into detail on their Bible studies and their spiritual conversations. In the first book, Dylan explained that he and Chris would refer to his mistress, Nicole Kessinger, as Jezebel, stating her teachings led Chris, quote, into sexual immorality. And according to Dylan, Chris has apparently explained to him, "I was having an affair with this girl and I ended up in love with 2 women at the same time." And according to Dylan, he said Chris admitted that he was stupid to cheat on his wife, and he asked for God's forgiveness every day for his infidelity. He did a lot of stupid things. And Dylan claims that on the night the murders took place, Nicole gave Chris an ultimatum. It was either Shanann and the girls or her. And as a result, Chris had chosen Nicole over Shanann and his children and murdered them to eliminate the perceived burden. And there's a debate as to who actually it was or who murdered who. Chris apparently described the situation as Jezebel was the forbidden fruit and it was costly. And I have some other choice words for her. I'm sure you might too. What are your thoughts? Let me know below. And the definition of Jezebel is an immoral woman who deceives people in order to get what she wants. Also, the question I ask is, so what does that make him? Now, in the letter written by Chris and addressed to God, dated March 2020, that was recently released, and titled Rescue Story, he wrote, "Dear Heavenly Father, I have backslidden. I am like a sheep gone astray from the flock and have fallen into the pit. The snare of the enemy has entrapped me. The words of a harlot has brought me low." Now he's calling her a prostitute by calling her harlot, which is interesting yet fitting in my opinion. He continues, "Her flattering speech was like drops of honey that pierced my heart and soul. Little did I know all her guests were in the chamber of death." The letter goes on to say, "The lust of the eyes, the lust of the flesh, and the pride of life. How did I not see it? How did I let this happen? The blessings you have bestowed upon me were right in front of me, and still I followed the perfume of a strange woman. The web of the enemy squeezes around my heart and is cocooning my soul to the point of suffocation. The enemy and his Jezebel mock and scourge me as they celebrate another capture." Now, note for those of you who are wondering what scourge means, scourge is a verb in this instance, meaning to whip someone as a punishment or cause great suffering to. The letter continues, "But oh, that men would praise the Lord for his goodness and for his wonderful works to the children of men. You, O Lord, did not leave me captive or condemned. You heard the prayer of the destitute and of the prisoner appointed to death. You opened my eyes. You made my ears ready to perceive, and you said, 'Come forth.' The web of death loosened its grip, and I walked into the light of your presence. As I humbly kneeled before you, you said, 'Go and sin no more. Your faith has made you whole.' In Jesus' precious name, amen." He also has the Bible references at the bottom of the letter, quoting Psalm, Proverbs, John, and Luke. And Psalm 107:8 is about giving thanks to God for his goodness and for the wonderful things he does for people. It emphasizes gratitude for God's kindness and blessings. Proverbs warn against the dangers of being seduced by temptation and sin, particularly through the imagery of a woman leading a man astray. And these passages describe how giving into temptation can lead to severe consequences, ultimately leading to death. In John, it recounts Jesus calling Lazarus to come out of the tomb, raising him from the dead. It symbolizes Jesus bringing life and restoration. And in Luke, in this verse, Jesus tells a woman who had been healed because of her faith, "Daughter, your faith has healed you. Go in peace." It's about the power of faith and the peace that comes from being made whole. And it does have a number 4 at the top of this letter, which I wonder what the other pages state. If you know more or you can take a guess, please let me know in the comments below. I haven't seen any other pages. But up until this letter, Chris had not spoken against Nicole, and he had previously claimed they still kept in contact and his feelings for her hadn't changed. But what about his mistress, his Jezebel and harlot? Nicole Kessinger was a geologist who worked at Anadarko Petroleum, where she met Chris in June of 2018, and they reportedly began dating the following month in July of 2018. And during her police interview, Nicole claimed that Chris had informed her that he and Shanann were already separated when they met. And she also claimed she didn't know that Shanann was pregnant. And Chris said to her in July that his divorce was finalized, according to her, and he asked for help in finding a new place to live with Bella and Celeste. And she stated she only learned that this was in fact not true after the news broke that the 3 were missing. And this contradicts documents released by the Weld County District Attorney's Office, and the documents showed that Nicole had searched Google on July 24th, 3 weeks before the murders, for, quote, "Man I'm having an affair with says he will leave his wife." She then searched Google again for "marrying your mistress" on August 8th. These aren't the only things she searched for, as she searched a year before this too. And there's a lot more and could be in a video in itself. The media reported on Nicole's suspicious behavior surrounding the case. A week before the murders, Nicole spent over 2 hours searching the internet for wedding dresses, raising questions about her true intentions in the relationship. And after the murders, Nicole searched the internet on her phone for "Did people hate Amber Frey?" And Frey was the mistress of Scott Peterson, who killed his wife Lacey and unborn child Connor back in 2002, I believe it was. And Amber wrote a book called Witness for the prosecution of Scott Peterson. Now, not unlike Chris, Nicole seemed very concerned with how people would think of her and her adulterous relationship with him. Apparently, after Nicole had told Chris that she wanted to give him his first son, he tried to cause Shanann to miscarry their son by giving her oxycodone. And it has not been clarified where Chris obtained the oxycodone. I think there was chitter chatter about it. You can let me know that below. It's been a while. Nicole explained her relationship with Chris in great detail to the authorities. She claimed that when she heard the news that his wife and daughters were missing, she asked Chris over a series of text messages to tell her what happened. She said, "I kept asking him, 'What did you do, Chris? What did you do?' I asked, 'Where's your family?' I was still in my head," she says. "I was stressed out. So I texted Chris one last time and told him, 'If you did anything bad, you're going to ruin your life and you're going to ruin my life. I promise you that.' And he reportedly replied, 'I didn't hurt my family, Nikki.'" And that was allegedly the last time she spoke to Chris Watts. There's also a clip from her interview that still to this day, when I hear her name, I hear her fakely say this, and she goes, why?
I am sorry, because I know it's hard to talk about it.
But it's so sad, and she's pregnant.
And, you know, on our end, we didn't...
And they're so cute. They're so little, like, wow. Why? How? I don't even understand how you could, like, bring yourself to do that to somebody who's, like, that big.
Now, in my opinion, she did try to come across so innocent, but in front of everybody else, you know, she's far from it. And in that video that I did a few years ago, which garnered 2.8 million views, I showed that he wasn't alone in that driveway. Now, admittedly, this was my first batch of videos on my channel and was working out how to show it and explain it on camera. Plus, I was angry when I made it, so I learned from that. But I'll show you here, and then you can go to that video to see it as well. But if you look at that video over and over, you start to see what you're looking at. And she has a ponytail, unless there's a male that has a ponytail. It is a female. It is a female. So I'm gonna replay this a few times for you so you can see the actual video, and then I'm gonna blow it up and I'm gonna show you what I mean. And I've enhanced it 3 different ways, just 3 different ways to see the effects. There's 3 different types of effects, and I did that so you see if you can see it even better. And I'm gonna enlarge it, I'm gonna show you the 3, I'm gonna do a few different things so you can actually see it. But who does Chris know that's very close to him, or close to him, or knows him? And then what I saw, because I reviewed the interview tapes, and what I saw was a woman with a ponytail that has sunglasses on her head. Here's the imagery, what was seen that night, and here's what I matched up. I also in previous times added a picture in my community tab, and you can see the shape of Nicole at the police interview, and you can see the same shape in the driveway, which is very, very similar, if not exact, to Nicole Kessinger. So tell me that that is Chris Watts, because it certainly isn't to me. Let me know what you think below. Also, according to digital data, guess who was in the area that night / early morning of the murders? Yet she walks free. And Chris, still being at Dodge Correctional, he has 1 hour free time a day, and the other 23 hours are spent alone in his cell. But it all hasn't been smooth for Chris in his behavior. It is reported that during his incarceration, Chris has received 2 conduct reports. In 2020, he received his first conduct report, quote, unauthorized forms of communication and unauthorized transfer of property. And for that, he lost canteen privileges for 30 days, as well as losing his phone privileges for 15 days. And the second report received is from 2021 for disobeying orders and possession of miscellaneous contraband. And for this, he lost his electronic access for 10 days, although it has not been reported what this contraband was. Again, let me know if you know. And in 2019, media reported that Chris Watts kept photos of Shanann, Bella, and Celeste as part of his personal possessions in his cell. Understandably, the public became enraged upon learning this, and they started a petition to remove these photos from his cell, reaching more than 20,000 signatures. I do remember this, and if you followed the case, do you remember that? Unfortunately, the Department of Corrections, though, responded in a statement saying it has no legal basis for removing the photographs from Christopher Watts. Incarcerated inmates are permitted to possess certain identified items of property, including photographs. Chris has also found religion in prison, as we learned earlier from his letters to God, and Chris identifies himself as a man of God and has a personal Bible in his cell. And God isn't the only one, though, he's corresponding to. In 2022, media reported that Chris Watts had found a new outlet corresponding with multiple women admirers during his time in prison. He appears to have gained quite a few female admirers who are attracted to the killer. And allegedly, these women have been sending him sexy pictures attached to letters to which he responds to. And disturbingly, the admirers seem to find him good-looking and misunderstood. Now, I'd love for you to comment on this, because on one hand, he's talking about a harlot and a Jezebel and shame on her, and here he is dabbling into the same thing. But you know what? That's different. Sure is redeemed. Now, one admirer wrote in her letter to Chris, "In my heart, I know you are a great guy." She continued, "If you do write me back, I'd be the happiest girl alive, that's for sure. Hashtag Team Chris, hashtag Chris is innocent, hashtag love him, and hashtag so cute." And in a similar note written by another female admirer sent with a racy picture of her in a bikini, she strangely said, "I found myself thinking a lot about you." In order to continue feeding his ego and his love letter writing, Chris spends his commissary money, it said, on stamps and papers to respond to his admirers. And last year, the Department of Corrections stated that Chris also now has a job at the prison working as a custodian. Recently, on May 16th of this year, Chris celebrated his 39th birthday behind bars, and a spokesperson for the Wisconsin Department of Corrections reported that inmates do not receive any special treatment on their birthday. They also revealed that Chris had no scheduled visitors, and it is widely reported that Chris doesn't have many visitors in prison except for the rare visit from his mother, which was earlier in the year. It's also been reported that Chris is having a rough time in prison. A source told People magazine in 2021 that no one wants anything to do with him. He's on the lowest social tier of the entire prison, and he's in protective custody because if he's around other inmates, he'd be in real danger. He's an outcast even among criminals. And the source explained further that he is likely the most hated man in the prison, spending most of his time on his own. 3 inmates told the New York Post that many inmates would not mind having the opportunity to hurt Chris Watts, and Chris has not been attacked in prison, with one of the inmates, Eddie, explaining that this is because of the prison guards who protect him from being attacked. He said he's effed in the head, and when you're in prison with a lot of guys who did really bad things, but you're still considered the worst person there, you're just evil. Dylan Tolman, the inmate Chris developed a friendship with, and the man who wrote 3 books about the murders committed by Chris Watts, said, "When people found out that his victims were 2 little girls, they wanted to kill him. He had nowhere else to turn, and I think I was his only friend." And David Carter, a former inmate in the same unit as Chris, has explained the hatred felt towards Chris in prison. He explained that the unit they were in, Unit 11, is for people that can't fit in with the general population and people with medical issues. He claimed that Chris Watts was in the unit as he would not be safe with the rest of general population, as many other inmates would target him for the nature of this crime. And allegedly, he had told David that he didn't murder Bella and Celeste, that it was in fact former mistress Nicole Kessinger. And recalling the conversation, David said that Chris wasn't able to stomach killing his own kids, adding that's why Nicole killed them. And Chris apparently also told him that Nicole helped him dig Shanann's grave. And this does not surprise me at all. Does it surprise you? David told the Daily Mail that he didn't buy Chris's attempt at passing the blame. He said Chris keeps photos of his kids in the cell, but there are none of Shanann, which now contradicts that there were photos of the whole family before, but, time passes and, perhaps he took it down. And David claims he has maintained contact with Chris since he was released from prison. Shockingly, David reports that Nicole Kessinger has corresponded with Chris through letters, even though they are not allowed to contact each other, but what are rules anyway? And in the past, Chris himself has claimed that the two still maintain contact. And I personally don't doubt this as well. He said that Nicole used different names when writing these letters to him. And David claimed that after prison, authorities found out about the letters. They suspended Chris's email account and began monitoring his mail. However, the Department of Corrections have not commented on these allegations at the time that this was reported on. And perhaps that ties into the account of his earlier report and infractions. And let me know if you know about that as well. But in a dramatic turn of events, David stated that Chris and his new friend Dylan Tolman have become lovers in prison. And although this was denied by Dylan's girlfriend at the time, and there was a guy who came forward after the investigation that talked about his love affair with Chris, which is a different guy than this guy. And in March 2019, authorities released audio of a jailhouse interview with Chris. And during this interview, they addressed claims from this 29-year-old Trent Bolt. And Trent stated that he and Chris had dated for almost a year. And in the audio, an investigator tells Chris that so many people who claim to have been with you dated you and slept with you. And Chris told the investigator that his own lawyer had informed him about some dude from Wyoming claiming the story and that it, quote, blew my mind. And he continued to say, I was like, who the hell is this guy? Trent Bolt had approached the media after learning of these murders. And at first, he made explosive claims anonymously before sitting down to an interview on camera. And he stated that he and Chris had initially started talking through a dating app before starting their romantic relationship. And according to Trent, Chris had told him that he didn't know if he was bisexual or gay. And he continued by saying that Chris said that he was in love with me. He said he had never been so comfortable with someone. He said that he could actually be himself around me. And to prove his claims, he showed messages between the two, including a message from Chris saying he missed his face. And similar to Nicole's claims, Trent stated he was aware that Chris had a wife and children, but was very much under the impression that Chris had split from his wife. On learning that Chris was living with his wife, Trent confronted him and said, why don't you just get a divorce? And according to Trent, Chris replied, I'm just worried that she won't let me see the girls. And he said that because of Chris's lies, they broke up in May of 2018, just months before the murder. And during his interview with investigators, Chris firmly denied these claims. He said, I've never been to Wyoming, let alone driven there to meet a person. I've never met the guy. I have no clue who the guy is. And Chris went on to deny speaking to Trent on WhatsApp as well. He went as far as to say he had never even heard of that app and he hadn't downloaded it on his phone. Strangely though, Chris told investigators that his lawyer had told him that another man claimed to have been in a relationship with Chris. And this man said he met Chris in a rehabilitation center. And the investigator asked Chris if he had ever had a gay relationship or been attracted to men. Chris simply just replied, no. And backing up Trent's claims, his mother was also interviewed by investigators where she told them her son informed her of the relationship long before the murders took place. And in a prison interview, Chris was also questioned about a woman named Amanda McMahon, and she claimed to have had a rendezvous with Chris in a Chick-fil-A parking lot. Unsurprisingly, Chris also refuted this claim. And on July 3rd of this year, media reported that their Colorado home, the family owned and loved, had sold after nearly 3 months on the market. The home is located near the Colorado Rocky Mountains and is 4,177 square feet with 4 bathrooms and 5 bedrooms. Unsurprisingly, realtors struggled to find a buyer for the home where Shanann was senselessly murdered and their babies, and it was initially put on the market in April for $775,000, then later reduced to $750,000 at the end of April. It finally sold in July for $749,500. And following the murders, Chris defaulted on his mortgage payments and the lender foreclosed on the property. This was after Shanann's parents filed a wrongful death lawsuit against him, and he agreed to pay them $6 million in damages. And it appears old habits die hard as Chris continues to put the blame on everyone else but himself. Initially trying to blame Shanann for the murders of Bella and Celeste, he is now pointing his finger at his ex-mistress for leading him astray. Many on social media believe that NK is also to blame. Some believe she got away with murder as well and changed her name because of it. And everything surrounds her seems suspicious. I would not want her to come at my door on Thanksgiving with one of my family members, would you? Plus, obviously, it's not right. She started a relationship with a married man, encouraged him to sneak behind his wife's back, and attributed it to the downfall of the marriage. And in my opinion, she lied to the authorities. You'll want to know also what the one shot of her bothers me to this day. Maybe I should put this in another video. She walks by the detective leaving and she looks at him in a certain way, and it's always made me wonder if they knew each other. However, even though Nicole's character and actions continue to come under scrutiny, even today, it was still Chris Watts himself who's ultimately responsible for these heinous and senseless acts. And he could have walked away. He could have divorced Shanann and be free to continue his relationship with Nicole, doing whatever they wanted to. Instead, he took drastic actions in an attempt to rid himself of the family he felt was a barrier to this torrid relationship and the new life that he wanted with her. And now his new life revolves around rules, regulations, and a cell he can only leave for 1 hour a day with his pictures of his little girls hanging on his wall, and his girls who thought the absolute world of him and thought of him as a hero, some hero. And let's hope he spends the rest of his days haunted by his atrocious actions. And his mistress contributed to this. He's so heavily influenced and intoxicated by her that all of this was okay. And I don't doubt she helped, in my opinion. And here's my original video that you can watch, and this is what YouTube thinks you'd like. Subscribe, like, and share.